Okay, good morning.
Morning.
All right, now as you know, we've been talking about the parables, and of course, we've also looked at the book of Jude, and we started all the way back at government, and we were concentrating on self government. We were talking about the gospel of the kingdom and how it's found in the parables. And last week, we came to the conclusion that the gospel of the kingdom is not about escapism, but it's about government. And the message of Christ was not to get to heaven, was it? Not as the churches preach. The message of Christ was to bring the heavenly kingdom down to earth, right? It was to bring the kingdom's order, its law and order, down to earth. That's what Christ preached. Christ spoke about law, order, and dominion. And last week we understand, as we looked at the other parables, we now understand that the kingdom operates right now through his covenant people. And that kingdom is legal, prophetic, and also it has implications nationally. This kingdom and the parables Christ spoke. So over the last few weeks, we've looked at the faith that was once delivered, as we saw in the book of Jude, and we saw that that faith includes moral law. And then we looked at the parables of the kingdom and how they are actually legal blueprints for that kingdom's framework. Of course, we looked at God, and we understand that he judges lawlessness nationally. And we looked at some examples of that in old Israel themselves, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and even fallen angels who kept not their first estate, right? Okay. And then, of course, we know that America was once fertile kingdom soil, but now it is a field mixed with tares, all right? Yet a remnant remains to uphold God's law and advance his government, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. So with that foundation in mind, we'll proceed with a few more kingdom parables. But first, I'd like to ask, what is this kingdom? We talk a lot about this kingdom. What is it exactly? Before we get into the parables, the Bible actually foretells the kingdom as a godly government that is upon the earth. The kingdom is a godly government upon the earth. Look at Matthew 6:10. This, of course, is the Lord's Prayer. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Where? Earth. Earth. So, Jesus did not teach us to escape earth, did he? No. He told us to transform it, you see. Thy will be done on earth means what? Well, God's will is law, justice, and obedience to him in the here and now. In the here and now. Look at Micah 4. This is obviously end-time prophecy. Verse 1 and 2, but in the last days it shall come to pass that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established in the top of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills, and people shall flow unto it. And many nations shall come and say, Come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For the law shall go forth of Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Which Jerusalem? The old Jerusalem? No, the new Jerusalem. Of course, we understand this also has parallel passages found in Isaiah chapter 2. And students of Bible prophecy will realize that mountains mean nations. We'll look at Daniel chapter 2 for more on that. So God's law is to one day govern many nations, not just a few individuals. Therefore, this end-time prophecy has geopolitical implications, does it not? Yes. In other words, we're speaking about God's kingdom and its global dominion. It's global dominion. Look at Psalm 72, verse 1 through 8. Give the king thy judgments, O God, and thy righteousness unto the king's son. He shall judge thy people with righteousness, and thy poor with judgment. The mountains shall bring peace to the people, and the little hills by righteousness. He shall judge the poor of the people. He shall save the children of the needy, and shall break in pieces the oppressor. They shall fear thee as long as the sun and the moon endure, throughout all generations. He shall come down like rain upon the mown grass, as showers that water the earth. In his days shall the righteous flourish, in abundance of peace, so long as the moon endureth. He shall have dominion also from sea to sea, and from the river unto the ends of the earth. Now, this should be, or at least a part of this passage, should be fairly familiar to us as kingdom believers, right? This psalm is a royal psalm. You see? It's a royal psalm, and it's also messianic in nature and prophecy. This is speaking of a kingdom. Where? Upon the earth, once again. And that kingdom includes, from these verses, an international peace, justice, and expansion. You see? And expansion. Now this psalm this psalm is recognized here in its entirety, verses 1 through 8. This passage is recognized as written by David for Solomon, as a royal psalm describing the ideal reign of a godly king. You see that? And so throughout our nation's history, though, as far as our early American pastors, founders, and thinkers, they have interpreted this passage as prophetic, and thus applying its language to a national government they wanted to found here in America. And of course, this national government that we see here described in this passage is under Christ's lordship. Now, where did our founders get the idea of a Christian nation under the headship of Christ? Could it be because they're Israel? Could it be because they read their Bibles? Yes. So, as you read this passage in Psalms, you'll see that the early American vision of government was actually borrowed from biblical themes such as this, especially those related to righteous rule, justice for the poor, and moral kingship under God. You see, moral rulership under God. Of course, Psalm 72 became a key text in the model of godly government because it shows us exactly what godly authority and rulership should look like. You see? This, he shall judge thy people with righteousness, and the poor with judgment. That passage there, you see, should not be interpreted as merely spiritual, but it can apply, and it does apply, to civil instruction. So the government is based upon God's moral law. As a matter of fact, early preachers like John Cotton, Samuel Willard, and Ezra Stiles, you recognize those names, they actually preached that civil rulers must be godly, and that Christ's reign would be reflected in his people through righteous magistrates and just legislation, of course. So you see, they understood that God's moral law must run the country, and it is driven by Christian leadership, you see. Now, this verse here became especially symbolic, which is Psalm 72, verse 8. He shall have dominion also from sea to shining sea, and from the river unto the end of the earth. Right? Now, of course, this verse has been symbolic in our American history because it shows the divine mission and the expansion of America through manifest destiny. Right? You see, the founders interpreted it as that. This verse was invoked as a divine parallel to America's manifest destiny from the Atlantic to the Pacific, you see. And of course, it's also been cited in American sermons, proclamations, and political writings, and it's also the national motto of Canada, our neighbors over there. And Samuel Adams, in particular, envisioned a nation under God's law based on the biblical concept of dominion. You see, so this is where we get this from. And of course, the first Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, who was John Jay, saw no contradiction in favoring Christians for national leadership. He said that the nation's institutions must be led by people who were aligned with Christian morality. So that's exactly where our nation started. That's what the founders thought of the Bible, and that's what the founders thought of this Christian nation. You'll find Psalm 72 regularly quoted in sermons, inauguration prayers, Thanksgiving proclamations like the one Washington gave, and our nation's founding documents. You also find it in college charters like Harvard and Yale, all the way through our nation's history. You'll see Psalm 72 then. You see, it is not just simply a song about Solomon's kingdom. It actually was viewed by the American founders as a template for a Christ-centered government, and that government was to be where? Upon the earth. Upon the earth, you see. And the Bible itself inspired the belief that America has a divinely appointed role in history. And it does, doesn't it? And it did, didn't it? And that is a nation to be what? Well, a nation where Christ's dominion, righteousness, and peace would flourish. Now, America's Promise has always preached this, the history of our nation and covenant Israel. I do have some materials, if you're not familiar with this, to go over and get from us. Heirs of the Promise. This is a staple in what we believe, and I would highly recommend you start here as a foundation to understand what it is I just explained. We also have the Marks of Israel. Get these and understand these if you don't know what we're talking about this morning. We have many, many, many materials on the migrations of Israel as the covenant people to this North American continent. We also have the post-captivity names of Israel, so that you can trace them through their migrations through Europe and into the West and on over into crossing the stormy North Atlantic onto this nation's soil here. Joseph's Birthright in Modern America by Robert Record, another excellent book. Starts in Genesis and works its way up to our modern history. The USA in Bible Prophecy by E. Raymond Capp. I highly suggest reading this one. And of course, we also have St. Paul and Britain, which we'll touch on Britain later today. So we have many, many books and pamphlets that you can get from our church and others, and also review Pastor Barley's sermons on the history of America. Review Pastor Emery's sermons on the history of America, and it'll put it all together. America's Promise has for decades preached that America is in the Bible and that it belongs to covenant Israel, just so you know. So, back to what we were originally looking at. What was that? We were looking at the kingdom, particularly the kingdom on earth, right? Now, in the Bible, God's kingdom is always explained as it was always meant to be earthly. Look at Daniel 2, verse 44. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. This is, of course, the stone kingdom seen in the vision, right? Now, this kingdom here, this stone kingdom, comes during existing empires, you see. During existing empires, and it replaces them. Of course, this has been happening all down through the ages if you understand that image and what each empire is successively, okay? Which we're not going to get into that today. But if you understand or you're familiar with the vision in Daniel 2 here, then you understand that this stone kingdom has indeed been replacing empires throughout our history, and that is a matter of history. Even with the Roman Empire, in Christ's advent, the kingdom has been expanding through Christian civilization, you see? Even Christ said the kingdom is at hand. Why? Because the government of God, that kingdom entered history with Christ's resurrection. You see? That's when it started. Now, look at this describing the kingdom. Romans 14, verse 17. For the kingdom of God is not meat and drink, but righteousness and peace and joy in the Holy Ghost. This verse here in Romans is describing the character of the kingdom. And you'll notice it's not found in rituals, but in what? Well, righteousness, peace, and joy. So what does that mean? The kingdom is therefore a legal and moral order of a transformed people. What people? Covenant Israel. And we touched on America earlier, but what about its role in the kingdom vision? Is America in the Bible? Does it have a role in the kingdom? Modern churches will say no, not at all. God forgot all about America. It escaped his notice. Look at Isaiah 33, verse 22. For the Lord is our judge, the Lord is our lawgiver, the Lord is our king, he will save us. Now, what do we have here in this verse? We have a judge, a lawgiver, and a king. Now, what are the three branches of government? We have judicial, legislative, and executive. Do we not? These originated from Scripture. You see, America's founders designed this system from biblical theology. Like we said, this has real-world historical applications to our own nation and its system of government. Look at 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 10. Moreover, I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and I will plant them that they may dwell in a place of their own and move no more. Neither shall the children of wickedness afflict them any more as before time. And of course, I've gone over this verse before, but being afflicted no more as before time doesn't mean that regathered Israel isn't going to go through trials and tribulations. these afflictions that happened to them as before time was that they were moved out of the area they lived. They were exiled. They were physically removed from the land. So here in this prophecy in 2 Samuel, we see that Israel will one day be given a land of their own where they will not be forced to move from. You see? That's what that means. So, I have myself, along with Pastor Barley and Pastor Emery, done many, many sermons referencing this passage in order to show that it has been fulfilled in the migrations of Israel through Europe and North America. So we're not going to get into these prophetic implications this morning. Like I said, America's Promise, we have a bookstore full of books about the migrations of Israel in this verse as proof of that, okay? Now, what about the parables of the kingdom? What about the parables of the kingdom and that kingdom's expansion? The parables speak of that. We looked at some last week. We're going to start again this morning with Matthew 13, verse 31 and 32. Another parable put he forth unto them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is like unto a grain of mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all seeds, but when it is grown, it is the greatest among herbs, and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and lodge in the branches thereof. So, this, of course, is the parable of the mustard seed. And here with this parable, Jesus has likened the kingdom to a mustard seed, which was the smallest seed known to his Galilean audience. All right? And although the seed may seem insignificant in appearance, once it's planted, it becomes a large tree. So this, of course, this parable illustrates a paradox that is central to understanding the kingdom, and that is that it begins small and humble, but grows expansive and powerful. You see, and this is done many, many times in the parables. And we see this, birds lodge in its branches. Now, this is imagery of peoples or nations. Now, remember last week we looked at birds or fowls or birds of prey. When it comes to birds of prey, they're usually oppressive systems of man that oppose God's kingdom, remember? But in this context, birds are symbolic of peoples or nations. And of course, here they're finding shelter or governance under its authority. That tree's authority, which of course is symbolic of the kingdom. So this is not just about individual spiritual growth, is it? Now, I've heard other churches preach this in a way that the mustard seed is symbolic of one's own faith planted in their heart. And as you go throughout life, you eventually become, I guess, one giant tree of faith. And you have people lodging with you. I don't know what they do with the rest of that verse, if this is about personal salvation or spiritual growth. But obviously it is not, because the rest of this isn't going to make any sense if you keep going that way, does it? The church just doesn't seem to follow their thoughts to conclusion here. And I've actually heard the mustard seed being preached as spiritual growth, but it's not about individual spiritual growth. It's a prophecy about the dominion of Christ's kingdom upon the earth. And it's advancing. Here's a few Old Testament parallels to this parable. Look at Ezekiel 17, verse 22 through 24. Thus saith the Lord God, I will also take of the highest branch of the high cedar, and I will set it. I will crop it off from the top of its young twigs, a tender one, and I will plant it upon a high mountain and eminent. In the mountain of the height of Israel will I plant it, and it shall bring forth boughs, and bear fruit, and be a goodly cedar. And under it shall dwell all fowl of every wing, and the shadow of the branches thereof shall they dwell. And all the trees of the field shall know that I, the Lord, have brought down the high tree, have exalted the low tree, and have dried up the green tree. And I have made the dry tree to flourish. I, the Lord, have spoken and have done it. Again, this passage here has many implications prophetically, but we're not going to be able to get into all of them today. What I wanted you to notice in this passage is that the mustard seed and tree imagery then is not new to the Bible. At the time the parable was spoken, you see. This has been used many, many times before. And so in Jesus telling his parable, he was actually building on Old Testament prophetic imagery, you see, which again would have been something familiar to his listeners because they read their Bibles, right? Did it ever occur to you that they even knew to look for Jesus in the first place? Because they understood the prophecies, right, concerning the Messiah. So this imagery of seeds and trees growing would have been something familiar to his audience once again. And the cedar here, of course, is a messianic prophecy. Of course, we can see that God himself plants that tree, which symbolizes his kingdom, you see. This verse I've seen used to illustrate that trees are a personification of people. And some people will take this verse and actually make it apply to the creation story found in Genesis and say that all the trees in the garden are people. But this is obviously prophecy. Therefore, it's symbolic. We can't do that with the creation story. That's a literal account. Okay, so don't make the mistake and fall into the out-of-context trap. So, this kingdom then, according to Ezekiel, starts small as a twig or a tender sprout, and it grows large, and it becomes the dwelling place, once again, for who? Many nations. Many nations, just as we saw in the parable. Now look at Daniel 4, verse 20 and 22 through 22. The tree that thou sawest, which grew and was strong, whose height reached into heaven, and the sight thereof to all the earth, whose leaves were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt, and upon those branches the fowls of heaven had their habitation. It is thou, O king, that art grown and become strong, for thy greatness is grown and reacheth unto heaven, and thy dominion to the end of the earth. Now this tree is from whose dream then? Nebuchadnezzar, yes, and it's Daniel interpreting that dream, right? Now, of course, this tree represents imperial rule of Babylon, right? Now, I understand that this applies to Babylon, given the context. But what I'm doing with this passage is I wish to point out the same use of the tree, and that this symbolism was reused by Jesus to show that his true kingdom, Jesus' true kingdom, will have a global reach. See, Jesus once again was building on Old Testament imagery. And of course, once again, we see the birds here as nations or people seeking order and protection. All right? Let's look at Genesis 35, verse 10 through 12. And God said unto him, Thy name is Jacob. Thy name shall not be called any more Jacob, but Israel shall be thy name. And he called his name Israel. And God said unto him, I am God Almighty, be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall be of thee, and kings shall come out of thy loins. And the land which I gave Abraham and Isaac, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed after thee will I give the land. Now what does this have to do with the parable of the mustard seed? This is all the way back in the book of Beginnings. And here we see God is speaking to Jacob, Israel. And though at the time he was just a single family, a single man, this seed would become many nations. You see? This passage here in Genesis 35 actually fulfills the mustard seed image on a covenant and national scale. You see? Jesus' parable actually confirms this. Confirms what? That the kingdom expands through true Israel. And who is that? The believing remnant who advances the kingdom. You see? The kingdom is not just a spiritual reign in our hearts, is it? No. It has real-world historical fulfillment. Real-world historical fulfillment. And right here, Jacob, Israel becoming many nations is a parallel to the mustard seed parable, you see? And of course, there are other examples we could use throughout the Bible and history that would also prove the parable of the mustard seed being applicable real-world history. Now, according to Acts 1:15, there was a small seed planted in Jerusalem, and that was 120 disciples in the upper room at Pentecost, right? Now, if you look at that little story of just a little bit of a small portion of men, 120, by the time you get to Acts chapter 17, they were accused of turning the whole world upside down. You see? They started small, and they grew bigger and had more effect. And then there's, of course, Rome, which was once pagan, and then it eventually became known as the Holy Roman Empire. Remember, Constantine became Christian. That's why Rome fell, or the empire did at least. So there's another example of something small and then working to get greater. And of course, we have Britain. With the Anglo-Saxon and Celtic Church, this country with their churches was the center of missionary work, which eventually sent the gospel across the earth, did they not? Britain, small and then large. Of course, we have our own America and our history, which was founded by a small amount of people, was it not, who had a strong belief in divine providence and God's moral law. And now look, America is the greatest nation on earth, is it not? It's known to be as part of Christendom, when we had small, humble beginnings. So all of these national awakenings, all of these Christian governments actually fulfill the imagery of birds lodging in the branches as well, which are nations and peoples benefiting from God's moral government. Is this happening in this age? Yes. People actually want to come to these Christian nations and benefit from being under God's moral law. All right? We are nations of Christendom. For better or worse, I understand. I understand we have immigration problems now, but that's a matter of judgment nowadays, not people seeking God's moral law, right? If you want to know more about that, check out the book of Joel and read about the locusts and cankerworms. Okay, one last Old Testament reference, Isaiah 60, verse 21 and 22. Thy people also shall be all righteous, they shall inherit the land forever. The branch of my planting, the work of my hands, that I might be glorified. A little one shall become 1,000, and a small one a strong nation. I, the Lord, will hasten it in his time. Is this a parallel to that mustard seed parable? Yes. God's kingdom grows by multiplication, you see, not conquest. It grows through his righteous remnant, and eventually, as a matter of prophecy, nations are formed and actually transformed under that kingdom's rule. You see, once again. Now let's go to another parable. This will be the parable of the leaven. Matthew 13, verse 33. Another parable spake he unto them, the kingdom of heaven is like unto leaven, which a woman took and hid 3 measures of meal till the whole was leavened. Now this is only one verse, but it's an entire parable. All right? Of course, this is the parable of the leaven hidden in 3 measures. Now, leaven here is symbolic of what? Leaven. Well, law. If we go a step further, we could say leaven is indicative of law and influence. Law and influence, okay? Because leaven is what? Well, it's a powerful yet unseen force, and though small in quantity, it permeates and transforms its environment from within. That's the function of leaven. Now, think about God's law. Think about the influence of God's moral law. In the parable, the leaven symbolizes the internal and systematic influence of God's kingdom through his law, spirit, and word. Okay? So while the mustard seed showed a visible expansion or external dominion, this is contrasted by this leaven, which indicates an invisible transformation or an internal reformation, if you will. Keep in mind the words of the second covenant, right? Jeremiah 33. Now, in the context of kingdom theology, this parable, the leaven is God's moral order, okay, which is worked into the very heart of society. Remember the founding of this nation. God's moral order was worked into the very heart of America's society through education, family, law, and faith, okay? Therefore, once the kingdom is sown, it actually affects every area of life. You see? Now, what about this woman here? What does she represent? A national covenant Israel, right? Of course, they're kingdom believers, you know that. Now, in Bible typology, the woman is often symbolized, as you said, of covenant Israel or Zion in some cases, okay? But it is a symbol of covenant Israel here. So the woman is not the church. The woman is not the church. I've heard this preached before, that the church is the woman who sows Christianity in the earth. No. The woman is not the church. She is an active agent of the believing remnant of Israel. Or, according to Romans chapter 3, verse 2, those who are entrusted with the oracles of God. You see, the believing remnant. Now, she hides the leaven. She actually hides the leaven, which indicates what? Well, it's intentional planting. It's intentional planting of what? Biblical principles, Bible law, okay? And it's being planted into what? Well, the nations. The nations. So the 3 measures, what are they? Well, typically 3 in the Bible represents completeness or covenant wholeness, if you think about the cleansing practices in the Old Testament. And the meal, of course, here represents human society, or the whole of human society, or nations. And these peoples, these nations, are eventually permeated by kingdom principles, God's moral law. You see this? It's working through the earth, hidden, permeating into societies, nations. So like we did with the mustard seed parable, we're actually going to look at a few Old Testament connections to give me some proofs of this, all right? Genesis 18, verse 6. And Abraham hastened into the tent unto Sarah and said, make ready quickly 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes upon the hearth. Now, here Abraham and Sarah are preparing 3 measures. And actually, this is the first appearance of this phrase, 3 measures, in the Bible, all the way back here in Genesis 18. Now, 3 measures was actually a standard household measurement for baking bread, and that would make roughly enough to feed a large gathering. But they're making 3 measures of fine meal for whom? For what? Yes, heavenly messengers, of course. Heavenly visitors, and they've come to them with a covenant promise. What covenant promise? Isaac, the son of promise. Now, because this 3 measures here, this helps with our symbolic interpretation, because here we see the hospitality of faith, which is preached throughout the Bible as well, which is Abraham's house, and of course the 3 measures are the hidden work of the promise. What promise? Isaac's miraculous conception, you see. These align with the kingdom parable, which is what? Well, quiet beginnings and miraculous ends, you see. So here we see the 3 measures working that way once again, the first appearance in the Word. 1 Samuel chapter 10, verse 3. Then shalt thou go on forward from thence, and thou shalt come to the plain of Tabor, and there shall meet thee 3 men going up to God to Bethel, one carrying 3 kids, and another carrying 3 loaves of bread, and another carrying a bottle of wine. Now, this is a symbol of an anointed transformation, is what this is. And I know this doesn't have the exact 3 measure example, but this scene actually occurs during Saul's anointing as king, okay? And here the symbolism of bread and sacrifice points to a covenantal transformation. A covenantal transformation, which is what? Well, a movement from the private to the public sphere of leadership. Leadership that is rooted in God's law. You see, so once again, I know we don't have an exact 3 measure, but we see from least to greatest working here once again. This time it's from the realm of the private into the public sphere of leadership, godly rule. And I know Solomon wasn't a godly king forever, but he started out under the rulership of God, right? Okay, so when all 3 of these things are taken together in this parable here, the leaven, the woman, and the 3 measures, they form a prophetic picture of how God's kingdom transforms the world, okay? From the leaven, we see that that was God's moral law and spiritual power, which spreads silently. The woman, of course, is the faithful covenant remnant who is entrusted with the word and strategically plants it throughout the world and its institutions. Is that what end time Israel is to be seen doing at this end of the age? Yes. And the 3 measures of meal, of course, represent the full scope of human society. Okay, and we understand the global reach of God's kingdom, and of course human society, all of which is destined to be transformed under Christ's reign. And that's a matter of prophecy. So in other words, the kingdom works quietly, but comprehensively, you see, and it will not fail. Now, the leaven parable is not only a spiritual message, is it? It's also a theological message, but it's also historically applicable as well. So early America was actually leavened by kingdom principles, was it not? And those kingdom principles were brought over by whom? Well, the believing remnant of Israel, or at the time, Christian Europeans, right? So there's the leavening. And the founding of this Christian nation was not a top-down imposition of Christianity, was it? No, it was the natural result of leaven working through the society over generations and formed the Christian nation of America, you see. Now, the third and last parable we're going to be looking at is actually two rolled into one. So we're going to look at Matthew 13, verse 44 through 46. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a treasure hid in a field, the which when a man hath found, he hideth, and for joy thereof goeth and selleth all that he hath, and buyeth that field. And then the next one is a parable, of course, of the pearl. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a merchant man seeking goodly pearls, who, when he had found one pearl of great price, went and sold all that he had and bought it. Okay, so the first parable we have here is the parable of the hidden treasure. Okay? And this treasure is hidden where? In a field. And in the parables, the field is what? Exactly. The field is the world. And of course, this is consistently found to be the case in kingdom parables. So the field is the world. The hidden treasure is not the church. Okay? I've heard it preached that way. The hidden treasure is not the church. It is a specific covenant people. Who? Israel. Of course, Israel is now scattered, obscured, and hidden among the nations, are they not? Yes. Here the kingdom, in this parable, the kingdom is presented as a divine operation to recover this hidden treasure, this hidden Israel. You see? So is Israel the treasure of God? Yes? Okay, I'll have to prove that. 2 or 3 witnesses, right? Exodus 19:5, you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for the earth is mine. This is the words of God through Moses, spoken to whom? Israel. Psalm 135:4, for the Lord hath chosen Jacob unto himself, and Israel for his peculiar treasure. There's 2, I have one more. Isaiah 62, verse 3, thou shalt also be a crown of glory in the hand of the Lord, and a royal diadem in the hand of thy God. That is, Isaiah chapter 62 is obviously end-time prophecy addressed to national Israel. There's 3 witnesses proving that the treasure of God is his covenant people, Israel. Now, what about the buying of this field? Who buys this field? Is that Christ who does this? All right, let's look at 1 Peter verse 18 and 19. For as much as ye know that you were not redeemed with corruptible things as silver and gold from your vain conversation received by tradition from your fathers, but with the precious blood of Christ, as of a lamb without blemish and without spot. So it is Christ that redeems the field. And notice, redemption here is economic. You see, Christ paid the price in order to recover what was lost. And what was scattered, lost, and obscured? Israel. Just as the man in the parable buys the whole field to get the treasure, Christ bought the world. John 3:16. Not for the world's sake alone, but for what is hidden in it. And what is hidden in the world? His covenant people, Israel. So no, I do not have a problem with John 3:16. Christ did indeed buy the world in order that he might recover his scattered and lost Israel people, his peculiar treasure. You see? That is the structure of that parable. Christ's mission includes a global scope, or buying the field. But the focal point is the covenantal treasure that is hidden therein. You see? So the field is the world, the price was Christ's own life, and the goal is redeeming the treasure. Who? National Israel. All right, Matthew 13, verse 45 and 46. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a merchant man who, seeking goodly pearls, who, when he had found one pearl of great price, went and sold all that he had and bought it. Now, this is, of course, the parable of the pearl of great price. Now, notice, unlike the treasure hidden in the ground, the pearl is a visible, single object. Right? A visible, single, or indivisible, or unified object. right? Of course, the pearl symbolizes the restored and regathered nation of Israel as a single covenant nation. I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll get to that. Now, how are pearls created? How are pearls created? Exactly. Well, they're formed in secret, are they not? In darkness and with pressure, right? Okay. Now, was darkness and pressure something that Israel experienced in their dispersion? Yes. Did that refine Israel? Yes, like a refiner's fire, right? So, this pearl is symbolic of Israel, right? How? Well, it's a single pearl. Like I said, it is unified like the Israel people, a single, unified, restored people, or a people brought into one fold. Is that national, regathered Israel? Yes. Here's some Old Testament proofs. Isaiah 43, verse 4. Since thou wast precious in my sight, thou hast been honorable, and I have loved thee. Therefore will I give men for thee, and the people for thy life. God calls his people precious here, which is a word reserved for rare stones or treasures, right? The pearl is not just any person or any group of people. It is God's uniquely loved covenant people. You see, look at Hosea 1:10. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea. This is obviously a reiteration of the Abrahamic covenant, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it shall come to pass in the place where it was said unto them, you are not my people, verse 9, lo am I. It shall be said unto them, ye are the sons of the living God, or Christian Israelites. Christian Israelites. So, although Israel was scattered and disowned, prophetically, Israel would be eventually regathered and re-identified. What was hidden would be revealed, right? And what was many would become one, right? As a matter of fact, our national motto is, out of many, one. Out of many tribes of Israel, one nation under God, right? Okay. The parable of the pearl matches Hosea's prophecy of restoration and identity. As a matter of fact, verse after verse after verse in the Bible tells us that one day national Israel's true identity will be revealed to kings, princes, and the world at large. And of course, they will be lifted up in glory to the Father, right? Those who have stuck with His word. The revealing of Israel's national true identity is a matter of prophecy. What was hidden will one day be revealed. Look at Ezekiel 37, verse 21 and 22. And say unto them, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I will take the children of Israel from among the heathen, whether they be gone, and will gather them on every side, and bring them into their own land. Where? North American continent. And I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be king to them all. Who? Christ. And they shall no more be two nations, Judah and Ephraim. Neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms, Judah and Israel, any more at all. And of course, yes, the two sticks prophecy is another parallel to this prophecy. So obviously, this passage here in Ezekiel echoes the imagery used in the parable of the pearl. And here we see that among Israel, in Israel, there will no longer be division. Judah and Ephraim here in context. Israel will become one restored nation. One pearl, precious to God. In the parable, we had the same kingdom prophecy. You see, what Christ redeems, He will unify. You see? So, these two parables, the hidden treasure and the pearl of great price, together provide us a picture of God's redemptive work in His covenant people. You see? And we're going to close with this one verse here from Luke 12:32. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Little flock who? Covenant Israel. Notice it's a little flock, a remnant within the remnant of Israel who will be given the kingdom. Those who are given the kingdom are called overcomers. overcomers. So today we've uncovered more truths in the kingdom parables, and we see that Christ's kingdom parables are not abstract religious stories about the church, are they? No, they're actually legal, prophetic, and national blueprints that help to give the framework of the kingdom in its order. You see? Each and every parable given in the Bible, even the Old Testament parables, speak of Christ's kingdom and the dominion it will have upon the earth one day. Of course, we saw that God's kingdom is actually a government upon the earth, and it's built by his law, and it's destined to shape all nations, destined to shape the earth. And we've seen that this kingdom's growth then is quiet and unseen. The kingdom grows without observation, right? That's another parable. The kingdom's growth is quiet and unseen, like the mustard seed and the leaven. We have some visible signs, we have some invisible things about it that grows. Yet it is expansive, and it reforms hearts, and it reforms minds, and it reforms institutions within it. The kingdom functions. And we looked at covenant Israel, of course, which was first hidden in the dispersion, then revealed as a unified people of great price, redeemed and restored by Christ himself. That's the gospel of the kingdom. That's the narrative of the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation. The people of the book are covenant Israel. These parables, then, the ones we've looked at this morning, and the ones we looked at last week, when taken together, formed a unified testimony, and that is that the kingdom is advancing slowly, strategically, and with God's sovereignty. It is also the story of Christ's dominion unfolding in real time through his covenant people. That's all I have for today.